Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, the definitive immersive sim Dishonored, and the potential and problems of bringing the grim industrial world of Dishonored to Dead by Daylight as a licensed chapter. Yep, the Potential and Problems series is back with a vengeance. We're starting again with a special one. I'll talk about why this series was put on hold for so long and what future episodes are going to look like later, but let's put a pin in that for now. Because while Dishonored shouldn't need a formal introduction to many people watching this, it most definitely deserves to get one. Dishonored is a series of 3 stealth games by the French developers Arcane Studios. It started with the original Dishonored in 2012. After the first game was met with roaring critical and financial success, Arcane Leon followed up with Dishonored 2 in 2016, and Dishonored Death of the Outsider in 2017. The series revolves around the antics of a mysterious godlike figure called the Outsider, where the player takes the role of a skilled assassin chosen to bear his mark, allowing them to combine the skills and gadgets of assassination with strange magical powers in the service of their own individual goals. The Dishonored series is known for a few distinct things: the grisly and highly detailed world that feels the consequences of your actions, the chaos system that forces you to tread carefully along the tightrope of good and evil, just like me when someone posts shit about Skull Merchant on Twitter, and the brutality of many of its kills and takedowns that sometimes gets so bad that just stabbing your target would probably have been the merciful way to go. Dishonored combines a stealth gameplay popularised by the Thief series with a wide selection of customizable magic powers and tools reminiscent of action RPGs and immersive sims like Bioshock, where the emphasis is put on how you, the player, choose to interact with the world and its challenges. It's perhaps fitting then that after the last entry in the Potential Problems series put the spotlight on the Bioshock games, that the follow-up in my series should be covering a game that shows so much love and reverence to Bioshock. And with Dungeons & Dragons, Castlevania and Tomb Raider on the docket for Dead by Daylight in Year 9, it's clear that DBD is moving more and more towards licensed crossovers with other non-horror titles, and I think Dishonored deserves to at least be part of that conversation. In today's video, we'll be dragging this stealth series into the spotlight, dissecting what it might have to offer for a licensed chapter, and finishing up as always with a power concept for the killer. And I've made some perks this time around as well. So let's get started. Dishonored's story takes place in Dunwall, the capital city of the Empire of the Isles, which is a fictional setting based heavily on Industrial Revolution era Western Europe, and led at the start of the first game by Empress Jessamine Coldwen. In that game you play Corvo Atano, her lover and bodyguard who's framed for the assassination of Jessamine and has to sneak and kill, or non-lethally incapacitate, his way through the scummiest people in Dunwall to clear his name, take revenge on the Empress's killers, and most importantly rescue Emily, the young daughter of Corvo and Jessamine who's next in line for the throne. The second game progresses the story 15 years to show us Emily as a young adult, challenged for her throne by Delilah Copperspoon, a witch claiming to be her mother's older sister. With her father frozen in stone, Emily has to use the training that he gave her to take up the mantle, travel to Corvo's homeland of Serkonos and fight for her throne and his freedom. There's also Death of the Outsider, which is very spoilery for Dishonored 2, so while I do love that game, I'm going to try to stay clear of it as much as I can. Throughout the games, the playable characters are sent on assassination missions to eliminate key targets in pursuit of their goal. And while these are mostly just ordinary folks whose role in the conspiracy is more important than any traits they might possess, the game makes each mission distinct and memorable by using an environment designed to shake up the formula and allow the player's gadgets and abilities to be used creatively. A great example is Lady Boyle's masked ball in the first game, where Corvo pretends to be a normal party guest and makes polite small talk, while he works out which of the 3 Boyle sisters is his real target. This encourages hiding in plain sight and using your sneaking abilities to break into the lady's bedroom without raising the alarm to work out which is which. Kirin Jindosh's Clockwork Mansion in the second game provides a totally different challenge. The entire manor rebuilds itself with levers and switches to create a multi-story labyrinth of shifting floors and hidden passages between the rooms, and the standard guards are backed up by clockwork soldiers designed by Jindosh himself, that must be fought or avoided in totally different ways to the regular human enemies. The attention to detail in each mission is absolutely pristine, with every action the player can take anticipated by the developers to ensure the world reacts accordingly, and this makes Dishonored a deeply immersive and fascinating experience to play through despite each run being relatively short. This is true especially for the second game. The choices between Emily or Corvo as the playable character give you 2 completely different experiences, as their power sets diverge and you can take on situations in different ways. But this incredible attention to detail has a secondary function too, beyond simply enriching the gameplay. By allowing the player's precise actions to tangibly influence the world in so many ways, it makes the cities at the centre of the games feel alive, and paints a picture of the world of Dishonored with astonishing clarity, and that world is, by all accounts, a pretty miserable place to be. This is most obvious in the first game. Dunwall is suffocating under the rat plague, and the streets and alleys of the city are full of reminders of the human cost of the outbreak. While the wealthy throw elaborate parties and vie among each other for the throne, the poor have to not only deal with the brunt of the plague, but also the collapsing infrastructure, overseers and guards overstepping their authority, and the rise of criminal gangs or worse that fill the power void created by the chaos. In Dishonored 1, Dunwall is a sick and dying city, and while a good ending in low chaos can put things back on track for the future, you'll still have to sink deep down into the muck and mire to get it. You can do the absolute best you can, not killing a single soul, and yet people will still suffer in squalor and misery. You can't fix everything, you can't save everyone, and even the people that you do save will likely never be the same again. Every single day in Dunwall is a horror story all its own. This is why my mind drifts towards it as a potential candidate for a future licensed chapter for Dead by Daylight. It's the official opinion of the devs that if there's a horror story out there to be told, it has a place in Dead by Daylight somewhere. And while Dishonored is by no means a horror game, I'd argue it most certainly qualifies by that metric. There's almost no way you can turn in the Dishonored games to avoid the grim fatalism inherent to life in the Empire of the Isles. If it's not the Weepers infected with the rat plague, rendering whole districts uninhabitable, it's the authoritarian government that polices every aspect of civilian life while allowing the city itself to rot. Or it's the witches and eldritch forces seeking to take power from the shadows. Even in Serkonos, where the rat plague never took hold, the place is run like a dictatorship under the rule of Duke Luca Abel, and his cabal of allies that rose up and took Dunwall's throne for their leader Delilah. Despite Emily being a good person and ostensibly a benevolent ruler from her seat in Dunwall Tower, she let all this happen on her watch. Her inaction allowed things to get this bad, and a big part of Dishonored 2 is Emily seeing the horrors of the world that she implicitly allows to exist as Empress with her own two eyes. Bringing in the world of Dishonored to Dead by Daylight would allow this side of the world to flourish in a way that you can struggle to experience when you're a magical stalker with the techniques and gadgets of a master assassin. Imagine a map showing us Dunwall's flooded district, or Karnaka's Adamire Institute. These are areas that we're used to seeing as opportunities for sneaking around, assassinating guards and stealing keys, but recontextualizing them as the location of a trial completely flips the script. You're not a predator with Dunwall or Karnaka as your hunting grounds anymore. This time, you're the prey, and the atmospheric environment designs that brought the world of Dishonored to life only remind you of that. It would also lend a very unique theme to Dead by Daylight that we've never really seen before, and one that would be hard to integrate organically. Dieselpunk. Well, it's kinda steampunk, kinda dieselpunk, combining the Victorian clothing Industrial Revolution setting, common to steampunk fiction, with devices and mechanisms more common in dieselpunk settings, like internal combustion engines that are powered by processed whale oil. Well, at least the creatures that Dishonored's populace refer to as whales anyway. If you're looking at a whale and it looks like this, there's probably something wrong with it. Dead by Daylight hasn't touched steampunk or dieselpunk before. The closest we've come is probably Deathslinger, but that's a bit of a far reach. And this is because it's very hard to introduce steampunk or dieselpunk to settings that don't already have it. You need to build these worlds very carefully to stop them falling into cliches or leaning too heavily on the style itself as opposed to the story that you're telling using the style. Dishonored absolutely mastered this careful world building, and the immersive, responsive gameplay wouldn't work without it. The setting blends tropes, eras and styles in such a distinctive and unique way that no original chapter or other licensed IP could truly capture it. Dishonored is whale oil powered lightning in a bottle. I think it'd be irresponsible to not at least consider it for a future licensed collaboration. But straight away we have a problem on our hands. Dishonored isn't a horror setting, and the fact that most of the game's antagonists are just ordinary people made interesting by their story relevance, their personalities and the environments you hunt them in, makes picking a killer candidate fairly tricky. When you're picking a killer, you have to ask yourself, what's the scariest thing you can run into in this film or game or whatever? And in Dishonored's case, it's pretty slim pickings. There are a few antagonists who provide more actual resistance than just a guy with a sword, a pistol and some guards to back him up. The most obvious being those empowered by the outsider with similar abilities to Corvo and Emily. Delilah Copperspoon is the most obvious one here, wielding the power of the void to effortlessly seize the throne of Dunwall by turning Corvo to stone. And Granny Rags and Brianna Ashworth also use these powers to make themselves harder assassination targets than just another noble or official would be. The problem with these three is relevance. Granny Rag is a secondary villain with limited plot relevance who you don't even have to fight if you don't want to. Brianna is Delilah's second-in-command who you only see for a single mission in the second game. And despite her vast magical power, Delilah doesn't really operate in the brutal physical way a killer needs to. Her magical power is used less as a weapon and more as a way to win others over to her side. At the end of the day, she's a queen, not a soldier, and I just can't imagine her doing the physical grunt work that the entity demands for its killers. There's one candidate who I can imagine though. An antagonist who balances the physicality required of a killer with the power and infamy to represent the franchise well, and that's the Master Assassin Dowd. Dowd is the leader of the Whalers, the assassin group contracted to kill Empress Jessamine, that kickstarted the events of Dishonored, and much like Corvo and Emily, he wields the powers of the Outsider alongside his skills and gadgets as an assassin. Dowd is a relentlessly popular character. For much of the game, he's the first character to really knock Corvo off his balance, and even after his boss fight in the first Dishonored game, his popularity endured enough to secure him as the playable character in Dishonored's 2 story DLCs, The Knife of Dunwall and The Brigmore Witches. He even returns in the third game, Death of the Outsider. And while his body is decrepit and injured after decades of fighting, he's still a force to be reckoned with and becomes key to the destruction of the Outsider by his apprentice Billy Lurk. Dowd would be a fine choice for the killer roster, but it's his appearance in Death of the Outsider that makes me a little hesitant about him. Death of the Outsider wraps up his story beautifully. He's an old man incapable of keeping up anymore, and to rejuvenate him to his youth to serve as a killer would almost feel cheap. Even at his strongest, Dowd is not what I would really call scary. He's very powerful, yes, and he's a skilled professional more than capable of doing what the entity demanded. But due to the secrecy under which he operates, he doesn't really have that palpable aura of fear that a killer should probably have. Especially when you consider that the guy he's up against more often than not is the one assassin even better than him. Let me ask that question again. What is the scariest thing you can run into in Dishonored? And the answer to that question is fairly obvious when you think about it. It's you. Throughout the Dishonored series, it's transparently clear that the main protagonist of the series, Corvo Atano, is pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel. Even before being given the power of the Outsider, Corvo was enough to give would-be conspirators serious pause. Dowd and the Whalers waited for Corvo to be abroad before making their move to assassinate Jessamine, because they knew dealing with him would complicate things enormously even before the Outsider empowered him. The only reason he was even there for her death was because he got back earlier than anticipated. And figures on both sides of Hiram Burrow's coup against the Empress treat Corvo with extreme caution, because his reputation as one of the most terrifying men in the Empire precedes him. And as you play through Dishonored and understand how powerful Corvo is, especially once the Outsider marks him with his powers, you realise that he really is as good as his reputation. Just look at how many ways Corvo has to utterly dismantle anyone he comes up against. If you're unafraid of using lethal force in Dishonored, it's actually a pretty easy game. Because when he's not pulling his punches in the interest of not taking lives, Corvo is more or less unstoppable. You'll notice this if you're trying out a low chaos playthrough and get caught in a difficult situation. The temptation to just instantly kill a guard instead of trying to make a break for it and try non-lethal takedown again is so enticing because it's so easy for Corvo to kill someone. And a lot of the gadgets and techniques at his disposal turn the game into a horror show for anybody in his way. Sliced and diced in spring razor traps, gnawed to death by swarms of rats at his command, forced to walk via possession into a wall of light or straight off a cliff, or stabbed in the back for your body to fade into ash and darkness, all from an assailant you probably never even saw coming. Everything from his skull mask that protects him from the rat plague, to the paranoid breakdown that Hiram Burrow's experiences as soon as he realises that he's next on Corvo's shit list, affirms that the Royal Protector is not someone to be fucked with under any circumstances. Corvo Atano is the terror of Dunwall, probably the most feared man in the Isles by the end of the first game, and as such would be a perfect representation Dishonored in Dead by Daylight. This does however present an issue. Corvo is our protagonist, the good guy of Dishonored, and there's a reason we've never had a protagonist as a killer before. Typically protagonists are, good people who wouldn't serve the entity, but I think this restriction applies entirely to Corvo. Corvo's defining trait is not his goodness, but rather his loyalty, and that is something that can far more easily be leveraged into the entity's service. Even in the low chaos runs, Corvo isn't shown to really care about the lives of the folks in his way. He'll avoid killing where possible, but that doesn't mean he'll show mercy to any of his targets, even if he does avoid killing them. The first Dishonored gained infamy on its release because the non-lethal eliminations of Corvo's targets are arguably as bad or worse than just killing them. If you don't kill the Pendleton twins, their tongues are cut out and they're sold into slavery. If you don't kill High Overseer Campbell, he's literally branded as a heretic and cast out into the street where he contracts the plague and is left to die slowly and painfully over the course of weeks. If you don't kill Lady Boyle, you literally sell her to her stalker, who promises that she'll never be seen or heard from again. Whether you're playing low or high chaos, Corvo is not a nice man, and will do absolutely horrific things to ensure the well-being of those he's sworn loyalty towards. He will do anything for Empress Jessamine or their daughter Emily, and while the depth of his bloodlust is decided by the player, and the low chaos endings are the ones considered canon by the story, Corvo is sufficiently brutal even in low chaos that calling him a good and merciful man would be a bit of a stretch. And, if Corvo entered the fog as a killer, he'd at least hear some familiar voices. Roger Jackson, the voice of Ghostface in the Scream series, voices Anton Sokolov in the first 2 games, while Piero Joplin from the first game is voiced by Brad Dourif, none other than the voice of Chucky himself that we already have among the game's voice cast. It's genuinely wild how many esteemed Hollywood talents are part of Dishonored's voice cast. Pedro Pascal, Chloe Grace Moretz, Lena Headey, Robin Lord Taylor. Hell, Dishonored 2 wouldn't even be the first time that Rosario Dawson would support a brutal Mars vigilante with strange powers up against Vincent D'Onofrio as a cruel and dictatorial manchild living in his father's shadow. To be clear, just because Corvo's not the nicest man, doesn't mean he's a monster. After all, the canon ending is low chaos, which implies that he didn't kill as many people as he could have done, but it wouldn't be the first time the entity has been able to manipulate someone's unfailing loyalty in the interest of acquiring a new killer. Adiris, otherwise known as the Plague, was a broadly good person when she was thrust into the leadership of the Babylonian priesthood, and the loyalty to her people and her god led her to worship the entity in her darkest, most desperate moments. During the events of Dishonored, Corvo allowed himself to serve the Outsider's interests to harness its power for his own, in the pursuit of his freedom and out of loyalty to Emily, so it wouldn't be the first time a cosmic power has taken interest in him. Not to mention that a high chaos Corvo would probably serve the entity gladly anyway, especially in the super bad high chaos ending of the game where you fail to save Emily and Corvo leaves Dunwall behind completely. Imagine, if you will, just after the events of Dishonored 2, the entity takes both Emily and Corvo into the realm and then offers Corvo a deal, an eternity of servitude in the fog in exchange for a guarantee of Emily's continued safety. Given how much Corvo suffers through in Dishonored and can suffer through again if you choose to play as him in the second game, I don't see a world where the scariest and most protective dad in the Isles wouldn't do that to save his daughter. And imagine, if you will, the entity offering Emily the same deal in reverse. She fights as hard for her dad in the second game as he fought for her in the first, and if one outsider-empowered assassin fighting for the safety of his family would be a valuable asset as a killer in the fog, who's to say that 2 wouldn't be even better? Corvo is the face of the series in every way. If anyone deserves the killer role, it's him. We could absolutely have legendary cosmetics for him, like Emily, Dowd and Billy Lurk, to bring the other outsider-empowered assassins into the fold. But what would his power look like? Well, I'll get around to that later. But before we do, let's talk briefly about the survivor options for a hypothetical Dishonored chapter. Similar to the killer options, Dishonored survivor choices for Dead by Daylight are a little bit peculiar. In general, most people who get enough spotlight in Dishonored to be considered for a survivor are either allies of Corvo who would make little sense as a survivor like Samuel Beechworth or Piero Joplin, or Corvo and Emily's targets who don't often get that much screen time or interact with our characters very much, and who you don't tend to think about much once their mission is over. At various points in this script I considered Anton Sokolov, Farley Havelock, or even the elderly and infirm Dowd as he appears in Death of the Outsider. My eventual pick, however, was a character from Dishonored 2, one of Emily's targets, who I'd say is the most charismatic and unique target of the series, who instead of stumbling around blind to our presence, spends most of his level actively taunting us, or chatting with his would-be assassin. The Sir Conan Grand Inventor, Kirin Jindosh. Jindosh is one of the co-conspirators in Karnaka to put Delilah on the Imperial throne, and as the preeminent inventor in Serkonos and possibly the entire Isles, he provides technical support and hardware to help Delilah achieve her goals. He aids Brianna in the construction of the Oraculum to amplify her magical power. His clockwork soldiers are instrumental in allowing Delilah to take and hold Dunwall Tower, and he conspires with the Grand Duke to eventually field an army of automatons big enough to seize the entire empire by force. He captures the genius Anton Sokolov to force him to help with his plans, and Emily breaks into his elaborate clockwork mansion to free him and stop Jindosh for good. Normally this would be just like any other assassination mission. Go in, track the target, kill them, or find a way to non-lethally remove them, get out. But most targets don't know you're coming, All can spend their time hiding from you while you find out a way to close the gap. Jindosh, however, revels in your presence in the mansion, mocking you over the intercom or gradually getting more and more annoyed as you break more of his clockwork soldiers. We get to enjoy Jindosh's presence as an antagonist far more than possibly any other enemy in the series. Everything from the complex and lavish level design to his egomaniac voice work, to the snotty notes he leaves around the mansion, to the fact that all of his clockwork robots speak with his voice even after he's dead, show us who he is in a way that's totally unforgettable. He's a genius, and he knows it. He's a smug asshole who will give legitimate credit to those smart enough to take him on successfully, and it's that combo of a huge ego and unrespect for the intelligence of others, even if he still wants to kill them, that ultimately allows him to die at Emily's hand, or get his brain fried in the electroshock machine he had built for Sokolov. Jindosh is a fan favourite villain of the series, just notable enough to be remembered well by the Dishonored fans, but not blessed enough with extraordinary abilities to put him above the pay grade for a survivor. His perks could be really interesting. A selfish and egotistical inventor could have perks relating to generator repairs, item efficiency, information, aura reading, self-preservation style anti-tunnel. I'm pretty bad at survivor perk design, so I'm going to leave it for now, but you can see where I'm going with this, right? So that's the potential for the cast of Dishonored in Dead by Daylight. But before I show you my power and perk concept for Corvo, I'd like to briefly discuss the problems in adding such a chapter could present. The good news is that despite not receiving a new game in 7 years, Dishonored as a franchise is still alive and kicking. Death of the Outsider was released in 2017, and while we haven't had a proper Dishonored title since then, Arcane Leon dropped Deathloop in 2021, a first-person shooter set in the far future of Dishonored's world, and there are plenty of references and consistencies between the two games that remind us of our last trip to the Isles. In addition, the IP has been expanded beyond just new game releases. A trilogy of novels, 2 comic books, a series of 3 animated shorts, and even a tabletop role-playing game have all been released in the year since Dishonored 1. But this doesn't mean that Behaviour getting the license would be an easy trip, for one big reason. The acquisition of Arcane Leon's parent company ZeniMax Gaming by Microsoft in 2021. Microsoft Gaming is one of the biggest juggernauts in the modern gaming landscape, owning dozens if not hundreds of gaming IPs, especially after they recently bought Activision Blizzard King. And they've recently made the news back in May, through a massive spree of redundancies following the acquisition of ABK and the decimation of their other studio staff, resulting in the closure of Arcane Leon's sister studio Arcane Austin, who developed Redfall, alongside Hi-Fi Rush and the Evil Within's dev team Tango Gameworks, rest in peace kings. And if you look at all the list of IPs that Microsoft owns now, you can see some huge names. Call of Duty, Halo, Overwatch, The Elder Scrolls, Fallout. You might notice something when you look at this list. None of them really have a history of outwards collaboration. Don't get me wrong, Overwatch will bring Transformers into their game, Call of Duty will add Ghostface and Saw for Halloween events, but it doesn't ever seem to go the other way. Microsoft tends to be very protective over their purchased IPs, only really using them for licensed TV shows or films that they'll have creative control over like Halo. The only exception I'm seeing here is Fallout, which has collaborated over the past year with Fortnite and Magic the Gathering, and appeared in Call of Duty as well, another Microsoft property. Presumably this was meant as promotional material for the Fallout TV show that was released not long after these crossovers. But regardless, Fallout is the one documented case of Microsoft lending out their IPs to other game studios. Everything else they'll collab in or across, but never out. And herein lies the issue. Yes, Dishonored 3 is actively in production, but Microsoft fridged the upcoming Evil Within 3 when they shut down Tango Gameworks. These guys are ruthless with the IPs they buy. Getting the license for Dishonored would be a hell of a fight for Behaviour, and without fan demand, I don't believe they'd ever bother to try. But these guys got a deal out of the terrifying lawyers at the House of Mouse to give us Alien. They got Konami, who just sat on the Silent Hill IP for a decade like a dragon's hoard, while shitting out Pyramid Head themed pachinko machines, and charmed them so much, they're letting us have Castlevania too. They even brought the ultra assholes at Hasbro to heel for the D&D chapter. Matthew Cote is a man that can't be stopped. If anybody out there can get Microsoft to sign up for a deal, it's him. But the question isn't just whether Behaviour could get the Dishonored license, but whether they would. Maybe if there was a big fan push asking for Dishonored in DVD, they might try it, and if they did try it, I think they might be able to pull it off, but there isn't, so I guess we can dream, right? So in this hypothetical dream world where Behaviour could walk out with a Dishonored license, what would Corvo even do? Let me show you what I've been working on. My power and perk concept for Corvo Atano, the Royal Protector. Corvo is a tall killer with a standard terror radius and the power, terror of done wall. Corvo can crouch and lean like Ghostface. Don't worry, there's more to it than that. Corvo has two modes, Prowler mode and Outsider mode. Prowler mode is the default, and Outsider mode can be activated on an 18-second cooldown. When in Prowler mode, Corvo can activate two abilities, Possess Crow and Outsider mode. Let's start with Possess Crow. The Royal Protector will not disturb crows when traversing the map. Corvo will see the white auras of all crows on the map, and can possess one with the power button. While a crow is possessed, Corvo can shift possession to another crow, or look around, watching survivors from the crow's perch. Survivors Corvo sees when possessing a crow can be tailed by locking onto them for 0.66 seconds, which will place a mark on them that will mature into a death mark in 8 seconds. Death mark lasts 60 seconds before expiring, and is removed when the survivor is put into the dying state. While any survivor is tailed, Corvo can teleport to any crow he possesses. This teleport will place him as near as he can stand to that chosen crow. This is the bread and butter of using the power. It's my way of translating Corvo's ability to possess rats, fish and people into the fog by possessing its most abundant animal life, crows. Obviously some maps do have rats like Larry's and Coldwind, others like Badham and Toba have insect life, but crows are the only creatures on every map, so they seem like the right choices to allow Corvo to possess. Even though you can't directly control them, you can see through their eyes, identify your targets before you engage and teleport directly to them, much like you would with animals you possessed in the game proper. In addition to information and mobility, Possess Crow is used to enable the rest of Corvo's power, Outsider mode. Outsider mode grants Corvo access to the power of the Outsider. Hitting a death-marked survivor refreshes Outsider mode's 18-second cooldown. In Outsider mode, Corvo gains access to Outsider powers that change depending on the circumstances. For as long as Corvo remains in Outsider mode, his relevant Outsider power replaces M2. Possess Crow can also be used in Outsider mode whenever you want. When no survivors are tailed or death-marked, Corvo's Outsider power is Far Reach. With Far Reach, Corvo can select a drop pallet, locker, hook or window that he has line of sight over than 12 meters and carry himself to it extremely quickly, immediately vaulting it if it's a pallet or window. This puts Outsider mode on its normal cooldown, and he undergoes a 2-second fatigue after using Far Reach. While any survivor is tailed, Corvo's Outsider power becomes Outsider Blink. Outsider Blink allows Corvo to repossession with blinks, but cannot attack for 2 seconds after each blink. Corvo's blinks have a maximum range of 18 meters and his blinks obey line of sight rules. He cannot blink where he cannot see. While Outsider Blink or Far Reach are available, Corvo is undetectable and vaults silently. Outsider Blink and Far Reach are both powers taken directly from the game, as the main ability tools for Corvo and Emily respectively. Far Reach is like a grappling hook, pulling you to relevant locations which can even give verticality on maps with multiple floors or high up windows, while Outsider Blink is more for repositioning to set up for a death-marked survivor, when Corvo will pull out his narcotic crossbow. When a survivor is death-marked but no survivor is tailed, Corvo's Outsider power becomes Narcotic Crossbow. Narcotic Crossbow has 3 shots, with a 3-second cooldown between shots and each shot applying a hinder to hit survivors. A Narcotic Crossbow hinder begins at 20%, and decays down to 0% over 5 seconds, refreshing back up to 20% if the survivor is hindered again before it reaches 0. If all 3 shots are hit on the same survivor without their hinder ever reaching 0, they pass out, and are stunned for 5 seconds or until Corvo hits them, whichever comes first. When Narcotic Crossbow runs out of shots, or after 20 seconds, Outsider mode will go on cooldown. As usual, I've got a bunch of add-ons over here, and I even think I know what his Mori could be. His rampage in Emily's throne room shows him using bend time to carve Emily's troops into little pieces in the blink of an eye. Imagine Corvo freezing time to stab or cut survivors over and over again, before leaving their bodies to be eaten by the rats. Now that's a Mori worthy of the name. And what would a killer be without some teachable perks? The icons for these were made by the lovely Wheatraws, my wonderful friend, so massive thanks to him for these ones. We start with Hex Grasp of Darkness. When a survivor comes down for the first time, Hex Grasp of Darkness will light. While Grasp of Darkness is lit, you pick up survivors 20% faster. After carrying a survivor for a short time, a killer can press the power button to teleport the carried survivor to the nearest available hook within 28 meters. Grasp of Darkness's effect persists as long as the lit hex totem remains standing. Dagger from the Gloom. Whenever a survivor becomes unhooked, you gain undetectable for 10 seconds. Whenever a healthy survivor is hit with a basic attack while you are undetectable, they become broken for a period of time. And the last one is Terror Tactics. Whenever you hook a survivor, Terror Tactics activates for a short period. The next time you drop from a great height while Terror Tactics is active, all survivors within 16 meters of the landing site scream and become exploded for 15 seconds. Terra Tactics then deactivates. So that's my opinion on Dishonored, and the potential and problems of a licensed Dishonored chapter for Dead by Daylight. The Potential and Problems series has been on ice for a little while for a number of reasons. I've had a lot of things to do, including the Grandmaster's Guide to Skull Merchant that ate up a huge amount of my time in the first half of this year, and shit tons of licenses that DBD is already inputting out has made it difficult to talk even more about hypothetical license content. I've also been making rework concepts of Freddy and Skull Merchant that have worked my brain in the same way that the Potential and Problems series often does, and I have a full original chapter concept coming in the very near future as part of my 50k celebrations, so stay tuned for that. But I think I burned myself out a little bit on them, doing 11 of them in the past year. I do want to do more of these though, but I'll do them at my own pace. They'll be less frequent than they used to be, and hopefully I'll be able to do more about new pieces of media. Maxine and The Crow are two examples I'd love to do once the new films are digital so I can use footage from them. All things considered though, I'm very pleased that Dishonored has been the franchise to get me back into making these videos again. Dishonored has been a series I've wanted to cover on the channel for ages now, and it's an interesting enough series with compelling enough characters and artistic choices to justify at least discussing it. Dishonored's grim and grisly world of diesel punk authoritarianism and eldritch power is unlike anything else in gaming. I think in terms of licenses to consider for the future of Dead by Daylight, I believe we could do a lot worse. Alright, thank you very much for watching, but before I sign off, I do want to talk about something very exciting that I'm currently being a part of. The Tabloid of Adirius is an unofficial Dead by Daylight community newsletter. It's written and edited by a bunch of community figures and friends of mine, and I am a contributor. Every issue of the newsletter will be themed primarily around a particular character. This month was Elodie, and with every issue I'll be doing like a column-y think piece type thing, talking about the lore of that character in question. There's a lot more than just my writing though. We've got everything from perks and builds in cooperation with Balanced by Daylight, to community creator spotlights, to little reviews of all the cosmetics releasing in a given month. It's a really exciting project, I'd love you guys to have a look, and the link to it will be in the description. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in time for Castlevania. Till then, cheerio.